Waves slammed against the tiny ship as it clawed its way toward Reverse Mountain. The sky was black, the wind was howling, and the Going Merry's mast screamed under the pressure. Luffy stood on the figurehead, laughing into the storm. Zoro snored against the railing like the world wasn't ending. Usopp clung to the mast, begging the sea not to destroy them. And right where a calm voice should be calling out currents and wind shifts, there was only empty deck. This was the first sign that something in this universe had gone terribly wrong. No orange hair, no tangerine-scented charts, no navigator barking orders with absolute confidence. But what if this wasn't just one bad storm? What if, in this timeline, Nami never stepped onto the Merry after Arlong Park at all? In this version of the story, the Straw Hats still shatter Arlong's rule. But Nami stays behind with Kokoyasi and the ruins of her deal, tied to Arlong's legacy and her village's future far longer. Luffy sails away without the person who reads the sea like a second language. The crew enters the deadliest routes in East Blue with raw power, wild dreams, and zero real navigation ability. Just how much can brute strength do when the enemy is the entire ocean itself? Across the series, Nami is not just a support character. She is the reason the ship survives whirlpools, freak storms, and the living nightmare that guards the Grand Line's entrance. The moment she joins in canon, the crew gains a human radar for pressure changes, a living map to the world's strongest currents, and the emotional heart who anchors their reckless captain. Without her, Arlong Park loses its insider strategist, Rao Alabasta loses its weather witch, and Logetown becomes a death flag long before Smoker ever lights a cigar. Imagine Arlong Park with Nami still on the enemy side, feeding no intel, drawing no maps, never guiding Luffy through the labyrinth of Arlong Park's layout. Imagine the Reverse Mountain entry as a blind charge where no one knows about the updraft current, the suction at the base, or the timing needed to survive. The crazy part was that this single delay doesn't just change routes, it rewrites relationships. Vivi's role on the Merry, Robin's place in the crew, even who becomes the de facto navigator or emotional core all shift under this new aura of chaos. This video will treat that shift like an awakening in the story's timeline. From Orange Town to Arlong Park, from Logetown to the first brutal steps into the Grand Line, each arc becomes a different battlefield once Nami's seat stays empty. Step by step, route by route, we will track how one delayed recruitment bends power scaling, fractures trust, and alters how the world's strongest forces even notice the Straw Hats in the first place. Setting the rules. How late does Nami actually join? To lock this what-if down, the story needs strict rules. No vague hand-waving, no hidden safety nets. When does the timeline actually split, and just how much does that missing navigator's seat destroy the entire route the crew takes? The divergence point stays in East Blue. Nami still appears in Orange Town, still teams up with Luffy and Zoro as a temporary ally, still steals from pirates and plays the battlefield like a thief walking through a war. She helps against Buggy, sails with them, and even reaches Arlong Park. On the surface, everything looks the same. But the moment Arlong's grip tightens and her deadline for Kokoyasi's freedom looms, the path breaks. Instead of cutting ties with Arlong after Luffy smashes the park, she never truly cuts the chain at all. In this version, Arlong's influence doesn't die that day. Through threats, hostages, or a hidden clause in their deal, Nami is forced back to Kokoyasi. She walks away from the Straw Hats before she ever says, "Take me with you." Luffy still fights Arlong, but without Nami's full betrayal of the Fishman, without her openly choosing the crew over her village, the emotional victory is incomplete. The crew leaves East Blue without a permanent navigator, without that iconic Tangerine and Mycon silhouette on deck. From there, the rule is simple and brutal. Nami will not officially join until after the Alabasta saga. Not in Logetown, not at Reverse Mountain, not in Whiskey Peak, not during the Desert War against Baroque works. She exists in the world, trapped under the shadow of Arlong's name and her own unfinished dream, while the Straw Hats sail into the Grand Line with a permanent hole in their formation. Narratively, her power does not vanish. Her ability to read currents, map sea routes, and sense weather still makes her one of the strongest navigators alive. But what if the crew no longer has consistent access to that? No last-minute charts magically appearing. No perfect course through the calm belt. When storms hit, they actually hit. The Grand Line's aura of chaos stays intact. From the series' own rules about lethal currents and killer climate remain in full effect, and plot armor against the sea is turned down to near zero. This delay also tears open an emotional wound. In canon, Luffy planting his hat on Nami's head at Arlong Park is the first sign of his creed. He will shoulder his crew's pain and protect their dreams. Remove that moment, and his template for handling every future trauma changes. Does he charge into later battles with the same fury? Or does that awakening of empathy get postponed too? Long-term, the crazy part was that this single shift can reroute bonds and bounties alike. Without Nami at his side, who becomes emotionally closest to Luffy first? Vivi, who literally fights a war with him? Robin, who understands the world's darkness? Or Sanji, who constantly risks himself to keep everyone alive? Who steps up as fake navigator and pays the price in detours and near-death storms? In the next section, the sea itself will become the enemy, and we will see just how much distance the Straw Hats can cover before the Grand Line tries to destroy them for sailing blind. East Blue without a heart, rewriting Arlong Park. The sea becomes the enemy, and then East Blue itself turns into a lie. Because when the Straw Hats finally reach Kokoyasi, the pieces look familiar, but the heart of Arlong Park is missing. Nami still steals the Going Merry. She still sails back under Arlong's flag, arms loaded with stolen treasure and maps. The village still glares at her with that mix of fear and betrayal. On the surface, nothing has changed, but what if the one scene that defined her entire awakening as a Straw Hat simply never happens? Luffy walks into Arlong Park with the same rage, the same hatred for a shark who treats humans like property. The first sign that this timeline is different is Nami's face. No stabbing her shoulder and screaming for help. No collapse on the road. No hat placed gently on her head. She stands on the balcony, jaw clenched, pretending this is just another transaction in a long, cruel war for her village's survival. Without that desperate plea, Luffy's focus shifts. He still wants to destroy Arlong. He still feels those invisible tremors of anger when he sees Nami's tattoo and the villagers' scars. But he looks at her as someone who has not chosen him yet. This is not my navigator that he is fighting for. This is a stranger trapped in a deal he does not fully understand. That single emotional gap reshapes the entire battlefield. There is no insider map of Arlong Park, no quick rundown of who Hachi is, what Kurubi can do, where the hostages are kept. Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp charge in on raw power and instinct, and the battle turns chaotic fast. Buildings collapse because no one knows which support rooms hold Arlong's charts. The pool shatters, sending water and debris into nearby homes. The fight still tilts toward the Straw Hat side because their abilities and will are overwhelming, but the victory feels uglier, heavier. The village pays in broken houses and extra blood. When Arlong finally falls, the aura in Kokoyasi is different. There is relief, yes, but also a brutal spotlight on Nami's past. Years of theft under Arlong's orders. Now, fresh destruction caused by a rescue she never explicitly asked for. So when Luffy casually offers, "So come sail," she hesitates longer. Then she refuses. Nami decides to stay, to rebuild the entire village, to replace every berry she stole, to redraw every map that burned in the tower Luffy smashed. She thanks him deeply, but says that freedom is something she has not earned yet. The moment he turns the Mary's helm away, the story fractures. The hat is dry. The deck is missing its navigator. And as the ship shrinks on the horizon, one question hangs over the waves. Without that raw, help me to bind them, can Nami and Luffy ever forge the same unshakable trust once the Grand Line starts trying to destroy them for real? In the next section, the answer starts with a storm. Who steers the dream? The fake navigator problem that Storm doesn't wait for the Grand Line. Starts the moment the Mary leaves Kokoyasi with an empty tangerine grove and no one at the helm who actually knows what they're doing. So who steps up? On paper, Zoro looks like the safest choice. He's sailed before, he understands basic ropes and sails, and he's already treated the ship like a quiet battlefield for naps and training. But what if the crew hands the compass to the man who gets lost walking in a straight line? His experience clashes instantly with his legendary, almost supernatural lack of direction. The first sign is simple. He insists they're heading north, while the sun is very clearly rising on their left. Usopp jumps in next. He's crafty, he's good with tools, and he can read numbers and charts better than Luffy and Zoro combined. He talks fast, spreads out the maps Nami left behind, and declares himself the greatest navigator in East Blue. The crazy part was that he actually believes it for a moment, but he has no training in currents, pressure, or sky color. He treats the sea like a puzzle, not a living thing that can destroy an entire ship in one bad hour. Sanji is the quiet third option. The moment he joins at Bharati, he brings real sea lore, stories from Zeph, knowledge of currents, and an instinct for when the air tastes wrong. He understands the all-blue dream means respecting the ocean's power. However, he's not a specialized navigator. He knows how ships move, not how the Grand Line's insane weather awakens out of nowhere and folds those rules in half. Together, they form a fake navigator hydra, Zoro on the wheel, Usopp over the maps, Sanji watching the horizon. And East Blue starts punishing them for it. The early post-Arlong journey becomes chaos. They argue over every course change. Zoro wants the shortest line on the map, Usopp wants the safest curve around every island, and Luffy just wants to go forward. They misread a current and overshoot Logtown's approach. They follow the wrong lighthouse because Zoro swears it feels right. Logtown stops being a clean, destined pit stop and turns into a lucky accident they slam into after days of drifting. Then the pattern breaks. Before Reverse Mountain, the Mary doesn't glide smoothly toward the red line. A sudden seasonal shift hits, the kind Nami would have smelled in the wind hours earlier. Rain walls off the horizon. The current beneath them twists. They're blown sideways into an uncharted island, and a jagged rock ring where waves hammer the hull like cannon fire. This mini-arc is the first real warning. Usopp's fake confidence shatters when his calculated route pins them between reefs. Zoro and Sanji's rivalry turns poisonous as they blame each other at the helm. Luffy laughs at the storm, until a mast snaps and nearly crushes a crewmate. For the first time, his carefree faith in luck stops feeling charming and starts feeling lethal. They survive, but barely. And as the sea calms, a new realization settles over the deck. If East Blue can do this, what will the Grand Line's true storms do? Just how much can raw willpower and a rubber captain really matter when the weather itself becomes the strongest enemy? Because at Reverse Mountain, without a true navigator, the Grand Line isn't an adventure. It's a death sentence waiting at the next wave. Logtown on borrowed time. A crew out of their depth. So when they finally limp toward Logtown, it doesn't feel like a victory lap. It feels like a ship that survived a war it never trained for. Without Nami, the journey to the town of beginnings and endings turns into an endurance test. Zoro's half-baked sense of direction, Usopp's shaky reading of currents, and Sanji's focus on the pantry pull them in 3 different routes at once. They hit minor storms that would have been routine with a real navigator. But here, each one is a boss battle. The Going Merry staggers through crosswinds, torn sails, and nights where the crew has to bucket water out of the hold until sunrise. By the time Logtown's silhouette finally appears, they are late, exhausted, and one good wave away from sinking. That exhaustion reshapes every iconic moment. Luffy still walks into Logtown with that reckless grin, still drawn toward the execution platform like fate has a rope around his neck. But the timing is tighter. The Marines are already on high alert because the crew's chaotic approach has been spotted earlier offshore. Zoro still runs into Tashigi, yet this time it's with bandaged ribs and a dull headache from steering through storms he never understood. Their clash of ideals still hits, but it's framed by the tremors of a crew that knows it's barely holding together. Usopp and Sanji are scattered on supply runs, racing against closing markets and an incoming pressure drop they can't read. Smoker appears not as a distant threat, but as an immediate wall. The moment he steps onto the battlefield that is Logtown's main street, the Straw Hats have no coordinated escape plan, no agreed-upon rally point, only panic and instinct. In canon, Nami is the first sign that the weather is about to turn. Here, there is no warning. As Smoker locks onto Luffy, a sudden squall slams into the town. Visibility collapses, rain destroys line of sight, douses gunpowder, and turns rooftops into slick death traps. Luffy is slipping through alleys on pure luck, Zoro is fighting to not lose Tashigi in the fog, and the entire chase devolves into chaos. Their escape doesn't feel like strategy. It feels like Dragon and the Storm reaching down and plucking them out of a noose they never saw tightening. And the crazy part was that this storm doesn't calm their doubts. It amplifies them. Back on the Mary, As they patch sails with wet hands, Usopp quietly wonders if they should delay the Grand Line until they find someone who can actually read the sky. Sanji, lighting a damp cigarette, doesn't disagree, but Luffy just laughs, staring ahead at the horizon. The king of the pirates can't wait for the weather to be nice. Willpower over preparation, dream over data. Then they see it. The sky ahead is split down the middle like the world itself is arguing. One half clear, deceptively calm. One half a raging wall of storm, black clouds stacked like a living fortress. It looks less like weather, and more like an awakening of the sea's true power. Just how much can this fragile crew endure when the entrance to the Grand Line looks ready to destroy an entire fleet? Without Nami, do they even make it through the gate alive? Or does the story end at the Red Line, swallowed before it truly begins? Reverse Mountain Roulette. Can they even enter the Grand Line? Reverse Mountain was never a simple gate. It was a natural fortress designed to destroy anyone arrogant enough to think the Grand Line was just another sea. In canon, even with Nami, the Going Merry is tossed like driftwood as insane currents collide, storms spawn out of nowhere, and the crew has seconds to choose the one upward stream that will carry them over the Red Line instead of smashing them into it. But what if that same entrance plays out without the strongest navigator in East Blue on deck? The log is still there, the charts are still there, yet the mind that can read the sky like a battlefield is missing. The first sign that something is wrong isn't a giant wave. It's the silence. No urgent orders, no sharp voice shouting corrections. Just Usopp squinting at the log, Zoro insisting they can muscle through any current, and Sanji focusing on keeping the ship steady instead of reading the wind. They misread the timing by minutes. That is all it takes. Pressure drops so fast their ears pop. Wind reverses direction like a slap. Dark clouds slam together and the entire sea starts to tilt toward the Red Line. The Mary's bow yaws off course as two competing currents grab her hull. Zoro digs into the oars on one side, Sanji on the other, each trying to correct in opposite directions, turning the ship into a spinning target. Usopp is already screaming that this is how they die, while Luffy is staring straight ahead at a wall of rock that fills his entire world. The moment he realizes they are not on the right stream, the sea stops being scenery and becomes the main enemy. The Mary is dragged sideways, hull grinding as jagged stone rises out of the foam. Sails whip violently, ropes snap, the mast leans at a killing angle. This is not navigation anymore, this is raw survival. Luffy doesn't calculate, he launches. Arms shoot out like harpoons, gomu gomu no rocket, into the mast, into the rail, into exposed rock. He uses his own body as a living winch, forcing the ship to twist, yanking the mast to spill wind, dragging the bow just enough that the next surge of current slams them into the correct stream by brute force. They live, but the price is brutal. Planks split, the figurehead cracks. The Mary shudders with every new tremor of the climbing current. When they finally crest Reverse Mountain and drop into the Grand Line, there is no cheering, no celebration. Only a shaken crew staring at a sea that has already proven it can destroy their entire dream without needing a single pirate, marine, or war. Pattern, interrupt. Cut away from the chaos. Back in Kokoyashi, Nami sits at her desk, calmly tracking pressure lines, sketching routes through storms she will not sail, surrounded by maps of the Grand Line that would have turned that suicide run into a controlled ascent. Just how much did the crew lose by leaving their future navigator behind? If they are this battered at the starting line, what happens when the battlefield is no longer stone and water? But Baroque works, secret agents. In a kingdom on the verge of collapse without her ability guiding them? Whiskey Peak and the Grand Line Gauntlet without their navigator. The battlefield shifts the moment the Mary's prow finally crashes through the Grand Line's first real gauntlet. But what if that impact isn't controlled at all? Instead of Nami calmly threading them through currents, the crew is clinging to the rail as a storm chews the ship and spits it out toward an island they never meant to reach. Whiskey Peak does not appear at dawn with calm seas and cheerful music. It looms out of a black horizon. The first sign that something is wrong is the way the waves simply stop. One moment they are fighting to keep the Mary from rolling. The next, they glide into an eerie pocket of still water, moonlight cutting across the cactus silhouettes. After hours of chaos, the town's warm welcome feels less like hospitality and more like a trap dressed as a festival. Usopp's eyes dart to the shadows. Zoro's hand never leaves his swords. Without Nami's weather sense to call out the wind shifts, the crew already spent everything just surviving the approach. They are exhausted, drenched, and off balance. That is exactly why Baroque Works hits harder in this timeline. The agents don't need perfect deception. They only need a crew desperate for food, sleep, and a break from the Grand Line's invisible war against their ship. The bounty hunter reveal still comes, but it lands differently. Zoro wakes to killing intent, yet coordination collapses the moment he moves. Luffy charges in late because he fell asleep the instant his head hit the table. Usopp's shots are wild because he stayed up navigating. Sanji is torn between protecting the civilians he wants to believe in and backing Zoro's read. The battle becomes a messy street brawl instead of a confident dismantling. Zoro still cuts through the entire squad, but he takes deeper wounds, and Luffy, when he finally joins, has to smash through more entrenched gun lines and traps. Just how much more terrifying does Baroque Works feel when their very first wave almost destroys the crew physically and mentally? All of this pressure exposes the limits of the fake navigator role. Sanji can read a log pose and basic charts. Usopp can sketch coastlines. Neither can predict the Grand Line's mood. Their route to Little Garden fractures into detours. A dead calm where the Mary sits for days under a burning sun, rations dwindling, Abwa and a fog-shrouded rock island where reversed currents slam the hull until the mast nearly snaps. Each misread current is another reminder that the Grand Line itself is the strongest enemy so far. Luffy keeps pushing forward. He calls every new storm just another opponent to punch through, but the crew starts to flinch at every distant thunderclap. Storm clouds feel like bosses. Fog banks feel like ambushes. The crazy part was that this tension replaces the easy comedy of early Grand Line travel with something closer to a survival horror aura around the entire sea. So when Vivi finally reveals the scale of Baroque Works and the clock ticking down on Alabasta, her shock is immediate. No real navigator. No one who can consistently read the sky that will decide whether her kingdom lives or dies. In that instant, and the question hanging over the Mary is simple. Can they even reach Alabasta before the war there is destroyed without the one ability they're still missing? Vivi, emergency navigator, the Alabasta detour. That realization hits Vivi like a wave. No navigator, no guarantee. Every mile between Whiskey Peak and Alabasta turns into a gamble where the sea itself feels like an enemy. But what if, instead of collapsing under that pressure, Vivi steps forward and tries to fill the void herself? The first sign of this shift comes the moment they leave Whiskey Peak. Vivi has traveled these waters as a princess and as Miss Wednesday. She knows key routes, common currents, and the rough layout between islands. She can point toward Little Garden, warn them about abnormal climates, and explain why the Grand Line's weather is so brutal. Yet when the sky darkens without warning and the wind spins on a dime, her limits become obvious. She can recall stories, but she cannot read the living sky the way Nami can. Without Nami's precise charts and real-time weather reading, their route warps. Instead of Nami's razor-sharp optimization, the Mary is at the mercy of sudden squalls and invisible currents. They overshoot safer paths, slam into harsher climate shifts, and skirt extra islands that were never on the original plan. Each detour drains food, medicine, and morale. The crazy part was that every mistake forces Vivi into a stronger leadership role. She is no longer just a passenger under protection. She becomes the strategist standing at the figurehead, arguing for when to push forward and when to retreat. On the way to Little Garden, fog banks close in thicker than in canon, and erratic currents hammer the hull. Usopp and Zoro wrestle with the rudder, but without a true navigator, they are guessing. Vivi's knowledge keeps them from sailing in circles, yet it cannot destroy the chaos entirely. Just how much strain does that put on her when every wrong call feels like another nail in Alabasta's coffin? Drum Island turns into the real test. In canon, Nami's illness, her supply management, and her calm in the blizzard are anchors for the crew. Here, the snowstorm hits earlier and harder because no one read the pressure drop in time. Luffy charges ahead with Vivi clinging to his back, but she is the one shouting directions, recalling half-remembered trade routes to Drum. She handles the supplies Nami would have tracked, rations the last medicine. Ekurin tries to calculate how long Chopper has before hypothermia claims him instead of saving others. One wrong slope, one missed landmark, and they vanish into white. By the time they finally claw their way back to the ship and limp toward Alabasta, The bond between Vivi and the crew is forged in shared tremors of fear and survival. She has made calls that Nami never had to in this timeline. She has watched the entire journey teeter on the edge of failure because one role remained unfilled. The moment she sees Alabasta's coastline shimmer on the horizon, a new question starts to awaken inside her. If the kingdom's fate is this fragile without a real navigator, does she dare leave these waters at all? Or is her true battlefield now the Thousand Sunny's future equivalent, not the palace she once called home? X. Alabasta rewritten. Battles without Nami's weather genius Alabasta is where that question gets answered in blood, sand, and exhaustion. Because the first sign that Nami never stepped on that deck early is written all over the desert itself. In canon, even before the climate act, her power is invisible but absolute. She reads the shifting winds before a sandstorm hits, times their marches between temperature drops, and threads routes through the dunes so the crew never wastes strength. She is the one who turns a killing climate into a navigable battlefield. Without flashy attacks, she quietly becomes their strongest line of defense against the desert that wants to destroy them. But what if that entire safety net is gone? In this timeline, the journey into Alabasta is a war of attrition before the real war even starts. Zoro's navigation is just stubborn straight lines. Vivi knows the kingdom, but not the Grand Line's insane sky. They misjudge a sandstorm by an hour, get swallowed by a wall of screaming grit, and the crew is scattered across different dunes. Luffy and Vivi lose half a day just regrouping. Sanji burns stamina hauling supplies that should never have been exposed. Usopp's lips crack, Chopper's fur bakes under the sun, and every extra mile walked is a silent tax on their future battles. By the time Baroque works moves, the Straw Hats are already half spent. Usopp and Chopper's fight against Mr. Four and Miss Merry Christmas turns brutal, not comedic. There is no Nami in the background, calculating wind direction to help Usopp's shots. He misses more, panics more, and takes real damage before he adapts. Sanji's maneuvers in rain dinners and Alubarna lose that off-screen coordination. There is no voice that knows the storm cycles around the capital, no warning that the skies will close in and reduce visibility. Every rescue run becomes a blind gamble. Even Luffy's clashes with Crocodile twist under this pressure. In canon, the timing of his return for the final battle is tight but just enough. Here, one misread storm on the way back from Yuba or the ruins delays him by crucial minutes. The bomb countdown races ahead while the crew stumbles through sand and smoke. They still reach the clock tower, but it is not a coordinated strike. It is a desperate scramble, with Vivi screaming over the roar of wind that no one saw coming. On the macro level, the cost is terrifying. Yet with no precise weather calls to guide troop movements or civilian evacuations, skirmishes flare where they should have been avoided. Casualties in the Civil War spike. The bomb plot comes within seconds of success. The Marines watching from afar do not see a rising, tightly coordinated crew. They see reckless wildcards who unleash tremors across an entire kingdom and just barely drag it back from the edge. Then the pattern shatters. Instead of Nami standing on deck after the war, the camera cuts hard back to Kokoyasi. She hears rumors in a crowded bar. A rookie from East Blue defeated a warlord in the desert. Luffy, without her, the moment she realizes they changed the world without her, a different awakening starts. If they can topple a warlord alone, what does that mean for her dream, her maps, for her place in his story? And what happens when those wild tides finally collide with her own coastline? The late recruitment. Why Nami finally chooses the Straw Hats. That realization doesn't leave her. It lingers like a storm on the horizon. Every time the wind shifts over Kokoyasi, it carries the same question. How far will that reckless boy go without her on the deck? On paper, Nami's free. The tattoo is gone, the village is rebuilding, Genzo and Nojiko are finally laughing again. But what if freedom without direction feels like standing in the eye of a hurricane, watching the outer walls close in? Reports keep drifting in with the traders and Marines. A Rubberman rookie clashing with warlords, shaking the entire desert kingdom of Alabasta. Luffy's name is now tied to rebellion, to toppled symbols of world power, and to tremors in the balance the Navy swore would never crack. The first sign that this isn't just pride or nostalgia is how angry she gets at the details. No navigator, no real weather strategy. A log pose barely understood. Stories of him almost dying under crocodile sand. nearly being destroyed by a desert he never should have crossed blind. The moment she hears he collapsed in the rain after that final battle, something in her chest snaps like a rotten mast. He's charging into the Grand Line like it's a flat, simple map, and every instinct in her screams that the sea will not forgive that. Now her war is internal. On one side is Kokoyashi, the home she sold her soul to protect, the people who need her charts for fishing routes and safe seasons. On the other side is that old, burning dream, to draw the entire world, to understand every current, every sky. And right between those two tides stands Luffy, the strongest idiot she's ever met, sailing deeper into nightmare weather with no one who truly reads the sea. Just how much longer can she pretend that isn't her problem? So she stops pretending. Instead of waiting on a dock in tears, she follows the rumors. A port town that just hosted a battered crew with a talking reindeer. A supply island where a long-nosed sniper bragged about surviving Reverse Mountain by luck alone. Step by step, she tracks the Straw Hats to a quiet, transitional island, a rare lull in their personal war against the world. There, the recruitment scene flips. No shattered tangerine trees. No, help me. Nami walks up the gangplank while Luffy's laughing about meat, and the entire crew falls silent at the aura in her eyes. She doesn't beg. She lays down terms. If you're really going to become Pirate King, she tells him, you need a navigator who won't let the sea destroy you before the Navy ever gets close. I'm done watching from the shore. I'm choosing this ship. This isn't a rescue, it's an awakening of commitment. Thanks to his new ability to inspire people just by existing, Luffy only grins and nods like it was inevitable. When she finally steps onto the deck as navigator, the question shifts. It's no longer, can they even survive the Grand Line without her? Now it's far more dangerous. With the missing piece in place, how violently does their trajectory bend? And who on this ocean is actually ready for a Straw Hat crew that knows exactly where it's going? Ripple effects, bonds, bounties, and a different Straw Hat Corps. From that point on, the Grand Line doesn't just bend around the Straw Hats, it remembers them. And the first sign that this crew is different comes from the way their bonds calcify without Nami there to shape them. Those early nightmare crossings, the storms, the log pose confusion, the half-starved detours. Luffy, Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, and Vivi bleed through all of it together. They share the same sleepless watches, the same arguments over which current to trust, the same narrow escapes where one wrong gust could have destroyed the entire ship. When someone drags a soaked, half-frozen body back over the rail, it is never Nami. It is Vivi, or even Robin if she joins in this window, quietly stepping in as the calm in the chaos. That changes the emotional hierarchy. In canon, Nami's map room and her Arlong scars become the emotional center of the early crew. And here, it is Vivi's desperation for Alabasta and Robin's hunted past that sit at the core. Luffy's late-night talks, those unspoken promises, gravitate toward them first. So, when Nami finally walks aboard, she isn't the first person Luffy risked everything to save. She is the outsider arriving to a battlefield of already forged trust. The moment she notices the in-jokes she doesn't get, the scars she didn't earn, the way Chopper runs to Vivi with a medical question before turning to her about weather, a new insecurity awakens. But what if that insecurity doesn't make her softer? What if it makes her sharper? Instead of openly crying over her past, she buries it under results. She volunteers for every negotiation, throws herself into every risky detour, and pushes her weather-reading ability to the edge just to prove there is no Grand Line without her. That has a direct impact on bounties and reputation. Before Nami, their victories are wild and ugly. Reverse Mountain without a real navigator is a collision course, not a clean stunt. Whiskey Peak becomes a chaotic brawl instead of a controlled takedown. The Marines see reports that read like disasters. Ships nearly sunk, towns half destroyed, collateral damage everywhere as this reckless crew stumbles through storms and enemies. Depending on how those battles land, the world government either slaps higher bounties on Luffy and Zoro immediately for sheer unpredictability, or underestimates them because nothing looks precise. Then, Nami steps in and the contrast is brutal. Scipio's cloud seas, Water 7's currents, Thriller Bark's fog and shadows all turn from death traps into controlled battlefields. Thanks to his new ability to trust a real navigator, Luffy starts choosing insane routes on purpose, knowing she can thread the needle. Just how much does it scare the Marines when the same pirates who used to barely survive storms now glide through them like they own the sea? That's when Nami herself becomes a flagged threat. Intelligence reports start underlining her name, the woman who turned chaos into coordination, the mind behind impossible escapes. Her individual bounty spikes earlier, not for brute power, but for the way her presence amplifies the crew's awakening as a real force of war. By then, the Straw Hats don't have one heart. They have several. Vivi's loyalty, Robin's quiet understanding, Nami's fierce, and the earned place in the command chain all pull on Luffy in different directions. Every rescue, every sacrifice now raises a harsher question. When the crew is forced to choose, whose heart do they protect first? And what happens to the one left waiting on the deck? Would the Straw Hats even be the same crew? And that's where the real fracture line appears. Are these still the Straw Hats everyone knows? Or a crew built on a completely different kind of promise? In canon, the pattern is clear. Luffy meets someone broken, walks straight into their personal war, and tears the chains off. Zoro at Shellstown, Sanji at Baratie, Nami at Arlong Park. Each rescue is loud, emotional, and public. The entire world watches this idiot in a straw hat declare again and again, "Your pain is my battlefield now." But what if that rhythm breaks? What if Nami's rescue doesn't come until Alabasta, or even Water 7? Suddenly, the crew doesn't feel like a string of people Luffy saves from execution grounds and tyrants. It becomes a slow orbit of independent forces. Zoro joins as the first believer, Sanji as a man chasing his own dream across the All Blue, Vivi as a princess fighting a civil war, Robin as an outlaw with her own unreadable agenda. They are not pulled into Luffy's gravity through one shared trauma at Kokoyasi. They test him, watch him, and then choose him. That shift hits Luffy's leadership at the core. The moment he puts the hat on Nami's head and walks toward Arlong is when his role as captain crystallizes in canon. Their wounds are his responsibility. Their dreams are an order he must obey. Delay that and his awakening as a captain comes in pieces, not in one shattering scene. He still throws himself at Buggy, Krieg, Crocodile, but the idea that he must carry every burden doesn't slam into him until much later. Maybe when Robin says she wants to live, or when Vivi stands alone on the palace roof. Trust changes shape too. In canon, Nami's breakdown is the blueprint. Vulnerability, betrayal, forgiveness, then absolute loyalty. Without that early, the trust web grows uneven. Luffy and Zoro share battle trust. Vivi earns political trust. Robin wins intellectual trust. Nami, when she finally joins, arrives less as the emotional center and more as the strategist who can finally read the sky and the sea. She becomes the brain that locks the crew's scattered hearts into formation rather than the heart that first pulled them together. From the outside, the aura of the crew warps. The Marines and pirates don't see a tight-knit family that somehow survived East Blue. They see a chaotic, improvisational alliance that keeps crashing into crises and walking out alive. The crazy part was that this version of the Straw Hats looks less like a rookie pirate crew and more like a roaming insurgent cell. Then Nami steps in, and the entire thing sharpens. Routes tighten, ambushes become precision strikes, storms turn from threats into weapons. Thanks to her new ability to predict and exploit weather at scale, the Straw Hats stop surviving the Grand Line and start destroying expectations. Pattern interrupt. Flip the camera. Imagine the story told from Nami's eyes. She watches this reckless captain topple Arlong without her, infiltrate Baroque works, turn Alabasta's war on its head, drag an ex-warlord archaeologist into his orbit. In that, she tracks their tremors across the world map, wondering when to gamble everything. When she finally walks up that gangplank, is One Piece darker, or simply a different kind of legend about a crew that learned to be a family late, and still chose it anyway? Your turn. When should Nami have joined? So let's pull back from that darker legend and look at the entire voyage we just rewrote. In this timeline, Arlong Park still falls, but without the hat on Nami's head, without that wordless promise that the captain will carry her pain. The village is freed, the map room is destroyed, but the navigator never steps onto the ship. The Straw Hats sail away with a victory and a hole where one of their strongest bonds should be. From there, the crew enters the age of the fake navigator. Zoro squints at maps. Satyusa pretends he understands currents. Sanji tracks wind for the sake of the kitchen. Each island reached feels less like destiny and more like a near-death dice roll. The moment they hit Reverse Mountain, that weakness turns lethal. No precise reading of currents, no calm voice in the storm. The Going Merry doesn't glide through a controlled ascent. It staggers, slams, scrapes, and barely survives the Grand Line's first test. That chaos bleeds straight into Whiskey Peak and beyond. With no true weather reader, every log pose adjustment is a gamble. Every storm a potential game over. Vivi's entrance becomes the first sign that fate is trying to patch the hole. She steps in as an emergency navigator, using Alabasta knowledge and sheer courage to keep the crew from destroying themselves on the Grand Line's insanity. But what if the princess has to choose between steering a ship and saving a kingdom? Alabasta turns into a messier war. No perfectly timed climate calls in the desert. No early warning on sandstorms. The crew still topples Baroque works, but with more casualties on the battlefield, more close calls, and far less elegance. Only after Crocodile Falls does Nami finally answer the call, walking into a crew that has been tempered by chaos, stitched together by shared near disasters instead of her steady hand. And that's the core takeaway of this entire awakening of timing. Nami is not just the navigator. She is a survival engine, a strategist, and in canon, one of the emotional pillars that turns this from a war story into a family story. Delay her, and the Straw Hats still fight, still win, still laugh. But the tremors running through their journey feel harsher, colder, less guided by that warm, stubborn aura at the helm. So now it's your turn. In this altered timeline, when should Nami have joined? Post Arlong with a slower trust build? Post Logtown, right before Reverse Mountain? Post Alabasta after watching their entire Grand Line entry from the shore? Or even later, when the crew is already infamous? And during that gap, who sits in the fake navigator's chair? Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, Vivi, or someone completely different? If this kind of timeline surgery hits, there are entire oceans left to rewrite. What if Robin joined in East Blue and reshaped the crew's brain from day one? What if Sanji refused to leave Baratie and the strongest cook stayed anchored to one battlefield? What if Usopp became captain for one arc and the flag changed hands just long enough to destroy everyone's comfort zone? Change one crewmate's timing, and the whole sea shifts with them. So whose story should be rewritten next? Drop your pick in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and keep sailing with these what-ifs until the entire Grand Line feels new again.